Welcome to the Growth Enablement Madness podcast, and I'm Jim Ward, your host, CEO of BrainCell, the growth enablement company. I'm absolutely mad about helping businesses grow and scale. And in this podcast, my team and I get a chance to talk shop with industry thought leaders about a variety of growth enablement strategies, stories, and technology trends. I'm happy that you're here, so let's get the growth conversation started. Welcome to the Growth Enablement Madness podcast. I'm Jim Ward, CEO of BrainCell, and we have a wonderful guest with us today. His name is Jeff Gothelf. He's an author, speaker, works as a coach. He does lots of stuff helping organizations to build better products and executives build the cultures they want to build better products. And welcome, Jeff. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, before we jump in, Jeff, could you start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today? And by the way, I noticed we're both Bentley alums, so let's give Bentley a plug.
Absolutely. I had a great time at Bentley. I went there for my master's. My background is in design. I started my career as a web designer in the .com hysteria. It was really fun. Yep. Learned a lot at other people's expense. Really, that's kind of what happened. And over the years, as the web became more sophisticated, my design work became more sophisticated. I went into design leadership and then product management and product leadership. And then I was lucky enough to be able to start a consulting company that was, actually it was a product development company in New York City that was based on the principles of the kinds of work that we were doing within our organizations at that time, which was heavily inspired by Eric Ries's Lean Startup and Agile software development and really just building customer-centric products, digital products and services. I sold that company a few years later. And since then I've been self-employed as an author, a coach, and a speaker. And I work primarily with large and mid-sized companies, helping them increase the responsiveness of their organizations, their ability to learn from their customers, and to really put the customer at the center of everything that they do.
That's very interesting, responsiveness. We'll come back to that because I have some questions around today. Of course, AI is at the center of everybody's conversation and deflection to AI products and bots. But we're talking about OKRs today and really about your most recent book that you co-authored with Josh Seiden. Looks like you published it in May, and it's titled Who Does What by How Much? It's a practical guide to customer-centric OKRs. And there it is right there, folks.
There it is.
You can find that book anywhere on like Amazon, your bookstores. Yeah. Maybe even on your website. Jeff, do you have it on your website?
Indeed, I do.
Indeed, you do. And that, by the way, is his name, jeffgothelf.com. Go out there and visit, and there's lots of content there for you to take advantage of. So what does customer centricity mean to you, especially in the context of modern businesses?
It's super interesting, I think, because I think if you asked any organization, I think the majority of them would say, we are customer centric. We care about the customer. But when the rubber hits the road and they're doing their work, most organizations, and these I'm speaking anecdotally from my experiences as an employee, as a consultant, et cetera, as a coach, the overwhelming majority of the organizations that I've worked with are not customer-centric. They are revenue-centric, or they are product-centric. And what I mean by that is that they focus on making a thing rather than making a thing of value. And so to me, customer centricity means that at the center of all your decision-making, you have a deep understanding of who it is that you're serving, who it is that's consuming the things that you're making, and how the things that you're making are making their lives better, easier, more delightful, more efficient, more successful, more productive, whatever it is that you're solving for them. And to me, when that's the case, you see better products, you see happier customers, you see better revenue numbers, and then ultimately you see an organization that can respond with the rapid pace of change today.
You're right. When you think about it, revenue-based, product-based, well, maybe you can provide us a few examples of companies that you think have implemented a very customer-centric perspective, and also they're using OKRs and how they're using them. Can you do that for me?
Sure. So look, I mean, the obvious companies, the big companies that have been customer-centric from the beginning are sort of the biggest companies in the world right now. So we think about Apple.
Yeah.
for example. It's a customer-centric, it's a human-centric company from day one. And as of today, not the biggest company in the world. NVIDIA overtook them, I think, this week, but they're like number 2 in the trillions of dollars of worth. But the focus there has always been on creating simple, usable products that make it easy to get stuff done, right? And so in that situation, those are the kinds of companies that we think about as being customer-centric. Netflix is another one of those. Google is famous for having been one of the first companies to implement OKRs. And I think in their early days, they really did put them to good use and have really begun really use them to drive the kind of customer-centric improvements that OKRs are intended to drive. We saw that a lot, I think, with Gmail over the years. But the companies that we've profiled in the book are not the Googles and the Apples of the world per se. We really try to take a look at organizations from a variety of different industries so that it's not just tech companies that can use OKRs successfully. There is for example, there's a big British telco that we talk about in the book, 60,000 person company, really focused on maximizing profits, right? It's not a very customer-centric point of view. It's how do you minimize the cost of services and the amount of services to maximize the profit. And when they switched to OKRs, they took a subset of that organization, 600 people, which is still a fairly large team. And they said, look, you have to work together to better understand the people that we serve. This was the team that was in charge of their retail locations. So when you go out to the mobile phone store and you buy phones and you buy service plans, et cetera, accessories, they reached out to those folks and they said, look, we need to get folks into the store. That's the first behavior. We need to get them into the store and looking at a variety of different products. We need to get them to ultimately buy a product and a plan that fits their needs, that they can continue to pay regularly, and that they will renew over time. Right? Everything I just listed there is a measure of human behavior. Walking into the store,
right?
Asking questions about a phone, asking questions about a plan, ultimately buying something and then using it successfully and then renewing it, paying for it successfully, et cetera. These are all the behaviors that we're trying to drive in a store. And those were the goals that were set for the team. None of those goals actually talked about what the store should look like, if there should be a sale, what things should cost, how to get folks into the store, right? That was up to the store personnel to figure out. And the fundamental difference there is that normally there would just be a top-down directive. We're having a sale, put this sign in the window and hope people show up. Instead of get people to come to the store. And your measure of success is an X% increase in the number of people who walk into the store. And that's a fundamentally different approach to building a business, to building a product, to building a service than kind of the more traditional, well, we'll build it and people will use it because it's there and it's amazing.
So I have some unorganized thought around all of this, and we've been dabbling with OKRs ourselves at BrainCell, and we're at the crawl stage. We've been testing. So one of the questions I have would be, and by the way, we should step back for the audience. What is an OKR? We should just describe and define it for them. Yeah. Would you mind doing that for me?
Not at all. So OKRs stands for Objectives and Key Results. And it's a goal-setting framework that's actually been around for about 40 years. But it became increasingly more popular in the last decade because of a book called Measure What Matters. That was written by John Doerr. John Doerr talked about Google and how he helped them implement OKRs and how they were born out of Intel and Andy Grove, and talks about Bono. If you read that book, it's really inspirational, right? Don't you want to be like Google and Bono? It sounds amazing. What's happened is people have begun to implement it and have struggled with it. So the way that we've defined OKRs in our book is you have objectives and key results. The objective is a qualitative statement about the future benefit that you would like to deliver to your customers. Right. And so what you'll hear is things like the easiest way to shop for furniture online, something along those lines. Right. It's qualitative, it's aspirational, it's inspirational, and it doesn't talk about how you're actually going to do that. The key results are the quantitative side of the goal. How will we know that we're the easiest way to shop for furniture online? Okay. And so we're looking for measures of human behavior, measures of customer behavior that tell us that we've built the easiest way to shop for furniture online. We've got people downloading our app. We've got people signing into the app. We've got people using the app, ultimately making a purchase and then coming back and making a purchase again in 3 months and telling their friends and using coupons and that type of thing. And so we're looking for the measures of human behavior that tell us that we've achieved it or achieved the objective. And what's interesting about that, and this is where we get opinionated about it, is that your OKRs are a goal for your team. They're not for individuals. and that your OKRs don't prescribe what you're going to make. So they don't prescribe what service you're going to offer, what product you're going to offer, what campaign you're going to launch. The measure of success is, did we positively impact the behavior of the people that we serve? That's what an OKR is.
So those who have been using OKRs, for example, to grow their revenue, you would say that's misplaced then, I would guess.
So look, revenue, it's a KPI that every organization, it's a key performance indicator that every organization is going to measure, right? And you could argue that revenue is a measure of human behavior, okay? However, between you making something, whatever it is, the product or the service that you provide, and revenue, there's a lot of steps. There are a lot of steps in between there. And so what I would push an organization that is simply setting revenue targets for everybody, I would push them to say, okay, well, how do you make money? What happens before you make money, right? Well, people go to the store. Okay, great. And then what happens? Well, people talk to the salespeople. Okay, great. And then what happens? Well, then they try out the product. Okay, and like we walk them through what essentially is a customer journey. And every single one of those steps is an opportunity to optimize that customer journey that will ultimately drive revenue. And so what being customer-centric in this case means is that you understand that customer journey and you understand where your customers are succeeding and failing in that journey. And then how do you actually optimize the specific parts of that journey so that revenue goes up, right? We absolutely want to make revenue, but it's a lagging indicator. What are the leading indicators of revenue that we want to optimize?
That's an excellent point. Underscore that one, the leading indicators. Yeah. Okay. And then I think you had a case study on Seagate as well, if I remember correctly. Was that you?
Correct. Yeah. It just published it yesterday.
Gosh. Okay. All right. Glad it was you. Wouldn't that be horrible if I was talking about a case study somebody else did? I've been noticing a lot of people are, and I've been on a tear around OKRs. It resonates for me. I've read Measure What Matters, read a number of books, but I think a lot of practitioners out there are getting it wrong.
Yeah.
And they're applying it to the wrong things, and they're trying to make it much bigger than it needs to be. So folks never launch. They fail to launch. That's just an observation I have. So your perspective of having the leading indicators, what customers want, makes a whole lot more sense to me. Appreciate that.
I mean, look, it's a big change. It seems like it's not. We're just going to change our goals, right? But actually, as you begin to change the goals, lots of stuff, particularly when you move away from the goal being produce a thing to change customer behavior, all of a sudden, there's a lot of elements of kind of the traditional way that businesses operate that have to change, right? So for example, teams normally are used to getting rewarded for producing a product, right? We opened up a new store. We launched a new product line. Okay. Did anyone show interest in that product line? Did anyone actually ask about it? Did anybody actually buy it? These are the kinds of questions that we're asking today, which means that performance management criteria has to change. It means that incentives have to change. And the way that people work together has to change, because if the goal doesn't prescribe a solution, and traditionally most goals do, the goal is to build a thing. If the goal doesn't prescribe what the team has to do, the team has to go out and figure that out. They have to discover the best combination of product, delivery channel, business model, pricing model that's going to drive the behavior changes that they're looking for. And there are many teams that don't know how to do that. They're used to executing on what somebody tells them to do, but discovering the right way to make the customer successful is a new skill set they don't have.
Total sense.
So Jim mentioned, Jeff, that we have been implementing OKRs probably for the last
20 years.
But this last year we've been really focused on doing it, and we've learned along the way, but we've also had some missteps in terms of what we're focusing on and realizing, oh, maybe that's not the right thing to focus on for an OKR. So we started really broad. Now we've gotten a little more narrow. There's so many things to say, let's build an OKR around. So how can companies kind of get it right the first or the second time? How do you decide what's the right thing to focus on for an OKR and what doesn't make a good OKR?
So a couple thoughts on that. Look, the thing that I think companies get wrong a lot is that because this is a goal-setting framework, we have to treat it like every other goal-setting approach we've used in the past, which is we fix our goals at a certain point in the year, and then we work for a year and we see how we did. Mm-hmm. The reality is you are baking a ton of untested assumptions into that. So instead of just saying, okay, we've set the OKRs for the year, let's see where we are in a year, there are going to be assumptions that are going to be wrong in there. So why don't we check in a quarter, okay, and see what we got right and what we got wrong. And then let's have the humility as a leadership team, as a goal-setting team, as whoever, right, to adjust the goals based on what we've learned in the last quarter. And that's a massive benefit. We talked about responsiveness earlier. This is where that responsiveness comes in, because we're allowing ourselves as an organization to change the goal, which will change the plan. We're not doing it sort of willy-nilly, as they say, right? We're doing it based on the evidence that we've collected in the last quarter. We set these goals. Guess what? These goals are huge, right? And we keep working towards them. We're not getting anywhere near them. Okay, we've got to bring them down a couple of levels. Or you know what? We're never, like, the team might come back and say, look, boss, you set up a 50% retention rate goal for the next quarter. We've been trying 3, 4, 5 different ways. Here's what we've learned. Realistically, I think we can get retention up by 5 to 7%. 50% doesn't seem realistic. That's good insight, right? That's not the team saying we don't know how to do this or we failed. That's the team saying we've thrown everything we know how to do at this problem. The best we can get out of it is 5 to 7%. The opposite might be true too. The team might come back. You might set a goal for them, like a 50% retention rate again, for example, right? And they might come back and say, boss, 65% retention rate, Q1, killed it. What do you want to do next, right? So we don't have to dedicate the next 3 quarters to that same goal. And so that's one of the biggest sort of mistakes that companies make, is they think that once they've set their OKRs, because it's usually a painful process, well, they're fixed and that's it. We got to live with them for a year. You don't.
Yeah, right.
You have to live with them until you've got enough evidence to justify a course correction.
So, and I'm sorry to interject in your line of questioning, Sarah, but that does come back to behavioral aspects, right? It's not just the retention rate. It's what are you doing from a customer behavior perspective that you may have in your key results that are those little things that actually increase retention rate. Am I getting it right?
Absolutely, right. So why do customers stick around? Right? What are the leading indicators of retention? Retention might be too high of a goal for a team to target because there are so many leading indicators to retention, right? Retention is typically an indicator of satisfied customers, right? So what do satisfied customers do? Well, they show up and they engage and they use the product and they pay us money and maybe they tell their friends about it. Conversely, you could look at it the other way. What do unsatisfied customers do? How do we reduce that from happening? And so you can dissect any of these key results into its component leading indicators. And the more granular, the more tactical it is, the easier it is for a team to target it. Retention has a lot of levers you can pull, but people really dislike the way that we do renewals, and so they just give up on the renewal process and leave. Is a much more tactical problem for a team to fix if that's what they have discovered is a leading indicator of retention.
I think about one of, just based on our experience in implementing OKRs, and anytime you bring something new into an organization, you can be met with some resistance from people on the team. Do you have tips for how to overcome that?
Yeah, and I'll give you, and it's funny you brought up the Seagate case study because it flies in the face of my advice, which is the answer to this question. And we can talk about why they did what they did in a second here as well. My advice to overcoming resistance is you have to prove the model. People who have worked at your organization for a while have likely been through a lot of change, a lot of ideas that have worked and maybe some that haven't worked, and they're probably a little tired of all the change. And you're bringing in a new goal-setting framework, which will actually impact a lot of what they do and how they do it. And so, number one, you have to tell them why. Okay, that's the first thing. If you want to overcome resistance, the very first thing you have to do, I'm going to quote Simon Sinek here, is start with why. Okay, why are we implementing this? As a leader, you've got to tell a good story. Today, we operate like this, and because of that, we're seeing these negative impacts to the business. In the future, we'd like to operate in a different way, and we'd like to see these positive impacts on the business, and we believe that OKRs is going to get us there. Okay, you got to tell that story in a compelling way that everybody understands. That's number one. The second thing you have to do is you have to prove the model. And what I mean by that is instead of telling everybody that they have to change overnight to this new way of working, you're going to take a pilot team, an experiment. You're going to run a process change experiment. You're going to take a small team, 5 people, 7 people, 10 people, and we're going to work with them to set OKRs for them. And we're going to time box it for a quarter. They're going to do this work. And at the end of that quarter, we're going to see how that went. What went well? What was difficult? What did they learn? Is this a good idea? What would the company have to do to adopt this more broadly? And if we have enough positive evidence coming out of that experiment, we scale up in the next quarter to 3 pilot teams. And if that works, we go to 10 teams and 20 teams and 100 teams, and we grow from there. So what we're doing is we're collecting evidence to justify greater investment in the change. And if at any point we start to collect some negative feedback, we have to address that, iterate on the way that we're deploying the OKRs in this case, and learn from that and move forward. That's the most effective way that I've seen most organizations pull this off.
Great. Are these OKRs, do you believe that they're a fit for all companies, or are there certain organizations where, you know what, maybe OKRs are just not the right thing for them?
Small versus big example.
I'm a general believer that human-centric goals make sense in the overwhelming majority of situations. I don't like to speak in absolutes. I'm sure there's situations where, for example, let's take space travel. Right?
Okay.
Right? Like if we're going to put a person on the moon, we don't get to iterate on that. Like they either make it to the moon or they don't.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of experimentation and learning that leads up to that. But ultimately, you don't get a lot of shots at that if you keep messing it up, right? So I don't like to speak in absolutes, but generally speaking, right, most roles in most companies produce something that a human consumes. And in that situation, you should be asking yourself, is this having the kind of impact on that person that I want it to have? And is there a way to make it better? And I think that in most situations, OKRs can make sense.
Great. Thank you.
Makes me think about cadence. You said quarter, but do you have a cadence of meeting on OKRs that's in shorter term? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Or do you wait a full quarter?
So in the book, we talk about weekly, monthly, quarterly as the check-in cycles. On a weekly basis, the team that has the goal is checking in with itself on the goal, how they're proceeding, what they're learning, how they might adjust the week's work based on what they've learned in the last week. On a monthly basis, you're meeting with key stakeholders, maybe not everybody, but maybe your immediate stakeholders, talking about what you're learning, how you're progressing towards your key results, what you're planning on doing in the next month, and so forth. And then on a quarterly basis, there's the big sort of check-in with all of the people who need to know about this. And your job is to have communicated transparently to those folks in advance of that meeting over the course of the quarter so that no one shows up surprised at that meeting. I think those meetings are a failure if you show up and no one knows that there's no way you're going to hit your goals, right? We want these meetings to be forward-looking. So the team shows up and says, listen, you know what we've done over the course of the quarter. You know where we are. Here's what we've learned, and here's what we think we should do in the next quarter. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's talk about that. And so the cadences are, again, weekly, monthly, quarterly, but the audience changes or increases with kind of the longer cycle times.
Okay. You're right. In the Seagate case study, they were all in, which is different from what we just talked about. I think that's the difference. They just went all in, right? Is that what I read in the case study?
That's exactly what they did, which is fascinating to me because the advice I just gave you is what I consult with. Like that is my default go-to, right? For any kind of process change. Start small, collect evidence, win small, and then grow. They didn't have the luxury because they didn't have the time. They were facing a significant existential crisis. This is a 50-year-old company at this point, and they employed thousands of people, and they were facing an existential crisis as this kind of tech turndown really gave them a bit of a beating that they didn't expect. And so they didn't have time to start small and then to learn and to grow from there. They had to go big. They had done their homework. They had done their research. They decided on OKRs as a leadership team, as a transformation team. And the transformation team came back to the leadership team and said, this is what's required for this to succeed at scale if we go big bang on it. And it's not just what the sort of the teams and the individual contributors are going to need to do. Here's what you need to do as leaders. Here are the changes. Really what they had to do, which is kind of fascinating, the language that they use. I spoke to the guy that was in charge of the transformation. They had to essentially allow their leaders, like explicitly allow them to be wrong, to create the space for humble conversations, to admit that they don't exactly know how to navigate out of this crisis, which was a massive cultural shift, right? Typically, and particularly in legacy organizations that have been around 50 years or more, right? There is this historical inertia that says the boss knows what to do. in every situation. And the boss tells people what to do. And they really had to deprogram their leadership team so that the OKRs could take root, so that as teams learned that their goals were wrong or the work that they were doing wasn't going to achieve the goals, they felt comfortable saying that. Hey, boss, that's not going to work, right? And here's what we think we should do instead. And that was a foundational transformation to making this successful for them. But they didn't have the luxury of time. They had to get this done as fast as possible.
Were you a part of that consultative effort?
I was not.
You were not. And because I was going to ask, maybe you know or maybe you don't know, with time of the essence for that situation, it's a gamble, right? Well, OKRs work for us. They took the gamble.
It really did, and they went big too. So because they didn't go small, if it didn't work, I don't know, who knows? Who knows what would have happened?
Right. Yeah. And we know post how they're progressing now.
They've righted the ship. They had a significant amount of layoffs as part of this crisis, but they're trending up and to the right is what they're telling me at this point. So it worked.
Happy to hear that.
Yeah, me too.
Let's see. I had a number of questions. Have you finished your line of questioning, Sarah?
I have a couple of other ones if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead, because he's bringing me down a lot of paths now.
I'm curious about, are there certain tools to be able to manage OKRs and track progress against them and the visibility across teams? Anything that you recommend from that perspective?
There are tools and no shortage of new tools entering the market on a regular basis. I think, generally speaking, I'm tool agnostic. So use the tool that works best for you. Now, the reality is that if you're a small company, a shared spreadsheet will do just fine, right? I think that if you're kind of a mid-sized company, the spreadsheet starts to outlive its usefulness very, very quickly. It starts to become unwieldy. And so you need to take on something a bit more scalable. Maybe it's some kind of a software-based tool or something that's built like that. I think for large organizations, tools like Workboard seem to be kind of where most organizations start. They're well thought out. They scale really nicely. They integrate with existing operational systems like HR systems and planning tools and all kinds of other products and services. And so I would say the size of your organization will dictate the tool that you choose to use. And if you're wondering where to start, I would err on the kind of the less sophisticated side of things, because implementing a tool like Workboard is fantastic if you've got 5,000 employees or more, 10,000 employees, but it's work and it's another tool they have to use, and integration and training and so forth. If you're launching a pilot team or two, give them a spreadsheet or two and then scale from that.
Yeah.
What about Viva Goals in Teams? Have you used it?
I've not used it. I've heard of it. I know I have some clients who use it. I'm not familiar with it, but again, if it's an enterprise level tool, it works for the enterprise. You should choose to use it if that's the scale that you're going to deploy at.
Okay. Yeah, because if you're a user of Teams, it's just another button on the side. So you're not leaving anything to go to somewhere else. As a technology company, we try to consolidate folks' experience by not having multiple systems to have to go into. Can you give me an example of perhaps, I want to say smallish, I don't know what smallish means to you, company that you have consulted with and how they started with something other than Seagate, as an example, which wasn't one of your companies, but somebody that you've worked with and you've gotten them going, and what did it look like? Do you have an example?
Sure. It's hard for me to name names because I don't
you can
have
redact it. Yeah.
Right. There's an organization that we've worked with that is based in Northern Europe, and they are a 150-something-year-old company that is focused on the shipping industry.
Okay.
Fascinating world, a world didn't know much about until we began working with them. And, this is not, there's so many ship puns you can use about this, turning the ship, all these types of things. This is not an easy organization to steer, if you will. I'm just going to keep using it. Right.
Let it go.
Right. Because there's 150 years of historical inertia about how this organization works. And because they work in an industry that is inherently not modern, right? Like there are systems and vessels and tools in place that have been in place for decades. And so getting this and so they are now digitizing the business, they're digitally transforming. They've got an influx of technologists that are coming in and saying, oh my God, I can't believe you operate like this. And what's interesting about that is that there's a real cultural clash, number one, from the traditionalists to the tech folks that they're bringing in right now to digitally transform the organization. But getting them to meet in the middle is really difficult because there's the way we've always done it, folks, versus the way we need to be doing it, folks. And, at the risk of kind of coming back to this theme again and again and again, the thing that brought these folks together is customer centricity, right? So why are you so married to this way of working, right? Well, because it makes our customers happy. Great. Why are you so married to this new way of working? Because it's going to make our customers even happier. Okay, let's talk about that because it's clearly a shared goal for us, right? And if we can start to if we can build a shared understanding there about the customer, their needs, what we're trying to do for them, what they're currently not able to do, how we might make that better, the next thing we can do is go talk to those customers together and start to build an understanding of how we might evolve the business in a way that respects a lot of the traditional ways that these folks are used to interacting with us, while still providing them with the modern tools they need to continue to succeed. So it's the focus on the customer that brought these two sides together. It was massively powerful.
Boy, you've really shifted me in my thinking about OKRs. And when we get off of this podcast, we got some talking to do, Sarah, and the leadership team. That's given me
continue to evolve.
Yeah, continue to evolve is
OKR
right.
journey.
I was looking on LinkedIn. You have something called the OKR Repair Kit. Can you describe what that is?
Sure. It's a free 5-day email course. So that takes on 5 OKR anti-patterns. And I don't remember exactly what they are because it's been about 6 months since we launched it. But it's five of the top OKR anti-patterns that keep organizations from doing this successfully and how to overcome them. So you sign up and then you get one email every day and it talks about here's the problem, here's why it's a problem, and here's how to work through it. And people have found it really valuable.
Yeah, so folks go on and find that repair kit because I think that'll help get you going. Perhaps that is the purpose of the repair kit, I'm guessing.
100%.
The get going part, yeah.
I think my final question as we think about applications of AI going more mainstream, we're seeing increased automation within the buyer's journey, right? Self-service. Do you see any changes in how OKRs will evolve or the role that they'll play in the future of business?
I've talked about this a lot lately. I've written about it a lot lately. To me, the key thing to remember here is that AI is a new feature. It's a powerful feature, powerful tool that any company can now deploy in a variety of different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of companies are deploying it just because their competition is doing it, because they can, and they're not really thinking through how we can use AI to make the customer more successful. It's just sort of launching it and hoping that it'll work or that it'll attract more customers. And I think that's the risk, is that there's a lot of crappy AI implementations out there. I think the good ones shine through and really illustrate how these things can make organizations, can provide more customer value to these organizations. But the crappy ones actually make the customer experience worse and risk damaging the brand of your organization. And so I think if you're in a position where you're thinking about how might we use AI, I would challenge you, instead of saying how might we use AI, I would challenge you to say, what are the biggest problems you need to solve for your customers right now? And maybe AI can help you solve one or more of them better than other tools. But again, to come back to the main focus of this conversation, the measure of success is not, did we deploy AI? The measure of success is, are customers behaving differently and hopefully in a positive way?
Yeah, this has been awesome. I think some of my pauses are because I'm thinking about our own internal OKRs and I'm applying them before I get to ask my next question. But this has been really, really enlightening, Jeff. I want to thank you very much for joining us here today. Could you tell the audience how to get a hold of you and maybe a little bit about, again, summarizing what you're doing for organizations, who the right fit of these folks are so that they get to you? Because I really believe you can help them.
Yep. So I'm super easy to find. That's by design. Please connect with me on LinkedIn or on my website at jeffgothelf.com. I work with large and mid-sized organizations. Usually we engage either with a C-level executive like the chief product officer or the chief operational officer, or with an HR leader who's trying to train a large chunk of the organization. And we teach product management, OKRs, organizational agility, and some product discovery as well, which is the process of figuring out what to make when you don't have a specific product-based goal to build. And so that's who we work with. And if you're interested, I'd love to hear from you.
Good. Folks, you know how to get them now. And if you need to spell that last name, it's Gothelf. So jeffgothelf.com. Thank you, Jeff, again for being on our program. I want to thank Sarah Reed, my co-host, and Brian Anderson, my producer. Jeff, we look forward to seeing all the great things you'll do in the future. I'll be watching as well. And folks, continue to find our podcast wherever podcasts are found. I don't know where they're found, Sarah. Where are they found?
Google, Spotify,
okay,
anywhere, Audible.
Ours isn't in the lost and found, right? We're not. It's like I'm doing
wherever
dad jokes.
You like to listen to your
horrible
podcasts, we're on it.
Well, again, I'm Jim Ward, CEO of BrainCell. Our company is focused on helping companies grow and scale. BrainCell.com. That's with an S, not a C. And I'm Jim Ward, and this is Growth Enablement Madness, where we're crazy about getting you to grow and scale. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Growth Enablement Madness podcast. I also want to thank Divinio Podcast for this episode's production and distribution. Finally, thank you to Sam Ward for our musical introduction and outro. Be sure to check out all of our episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. New episodes are available monthly and cover all important topics for growing and scaling your business. Until next time, this is Jim Ward signing off. Let's grow.